have to be afraid. God has great plans for you. This child is his way.
There's this girl at the orphanage. I think that she really needs someone to look out for her.
Carlito suffers from a touch of madness.
You must be very careful, Margaret. Bad things will start to happen around her. Evil things.
It's all for you. No, don't.
What does any of this have to do with Carlita?
This church has maintained power for thousands of years. Lady will stop at nothing to keep it that way. How do you control people who no longer believe? You create something to fear. I believe the girl is to be the mother.
Mother of what?
It's the mark of the devil.
It's not real. 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 What's not real? Who did that?
This is very real.
Everyone, welcome to the Echoes of the Inner Sanctum. Today's guest author is Andrew Nyberg. He writes Crossed and Raw, he writes fantasy, he writes horror, he writes science fiction. He's the master of all genres. So Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, so my name is Andrew Nyberg. I teach creative writing, Japanese literature, and other writing courses at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. Been here since 2006, so quite a while. Have an MFA in creative writing and an MA in English. So I did some time in higher education. No, I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I'm married. I have 2 kids of my own and 2 wonderful stepchildren. Aside from writing and just loving to read, I am an avid gamer. I do play the drums. I play guitar. My kids and I do a little bit of taekwondo together. Really, I just try to kind of keep myself as busy as I can, and trying to not let time slip away.
Yeah, how old are your kids?
Well, so my wife's children are, oh gosh, I think her oldest is 23 now. She's gotten so old, it's crazy. And then her son is just turned 18, and my daughter is 11, and my son is 8. So 5th grade and 2nd grade, just now heading up to the next grades.
So you kind of took over that movie Cheaper by the Dozen. Oh, it was
Oh,
That's
we
great.
definitely don't lack energy in the house.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the 18 and 23-year-olds should be moving out pretty soon, right? Maybe.
Yeah, they're all. Yeah, they don't live with us, yeah, it's definitely it's getting there.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Anyway, well, what's the first thing you remember writing? Were you in grade school or high school or where?
So weirdly enough, the first thing I remember writing is actually the entire transcript of the movie Aliens when I was in third grade. My
Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, so that was a favorite, a household favorite. My sister and I watched it on VHS over and over and over. And my sister is definitely somebody who wanted to be creative, but she was also really self-conscious about that kind of thing. And so she got it into her mind that she wanted to write sort of like Mad Magazine style parodies. And she recruited me into her room and basically wanted me as an audience, but also wanted me to be able to do something while I was there. So she started writing a parody of Aliens, and I started writing the transcript because at the time I didn't really know how to tell a story. I didn't have any ideas, but I was like, well, I know the movie well enough that I can just write it down. And that's literally the first thing I remember.
So you wrote a transcript of a parody or the movie that she used to
So
write
I
the
did the movie first, and then I started writing my own parodies. Actually, after that, they were all ridiculous and silly and full of pointless
Okay. So this
bickering.
was before you could just look online and get a copy of the screenplay, obviously.
No, that was this would have been about 1987, I want to say, or 1988. Um, so yeah, no internet, nothing. We just watched the movie over and over and over, and we quoted it to each other all the time. We used to play Aliens, like we'd get our toy guns and run around the house pretending like we were shooting xenomorphs. And yeah.
Right. That's good. All right. So what, I guess you were interested. I mean, I consider Alien a horror movie.
Oh yeah.
It's set in space, but yeah. But where did you go from there with horror?
So the actual from there that would be about third grade. About fourth grade is when I started reading just classic Edgar Allan Poe. I read The Raven at that age, and then a handful of other stories like Fall of the House of Usher I remember really well, and The Telltale Heart and Pit and Pendulum. Read a couple of his other poems as well, but really actually fifth grade, and this again I blame this on my sister, but she had started raiding my parents' bookshelves, and she was telling me about The Stand, and I thought it sounded absolutely amazing. And that was the first Stephen King book that I read about fifth grade. I was really proud of being able to make it through such a large book, and I knew while I was reading it that I was probably not supposed to be reading it because it
Right.
definitely had it had more adult oriented subjects than I was used to reading. But no, from there, my parents had a big Stephen King collection and a pretty solid Dean Koontz collection. And so, like their stance was always that if we could actually read it and understand it, we were allowed to read it. And so,
Right.
pretty much just started pulling those off the shelves. I know Pet Cemetery was one of the next ones I read, and it not too long after The Shining. We didn't really have anything post. This is still fairly early, so I think I know the last book I read when I was younger from King was I believe it was Dolores Claiborne, and that was I got burned out at that age, and I never really picked him back up after that. But I guess that'd be somewhere around the mid '90s when that one came out. My memory is a bit fuzzy on it.
Did you read any Lovecraft?
So I read Lovecraft a little while later when I was in college. I had actually gotten kind of tipped towards him by a John Carpenter film, In the Mouth of Madness, which it's always been a
I
favorite
forgot
movie
that
of mine.
Carpenter made that. Yeah, that was excellent.
Yeah, and I mean, it's straight up homage to both Stephen King and Lovecraft, and so I started looking into to Lovecraft at that point, and I definitely have enjoyed his work, and he's sort of had some long-term influence, especially just his. I loved his methods of description for for horror, where you never get the full-on view of most of what you're supposed to be afraid of in his books. That instead you get glimpses and you see things in the darkness. Because I definitely have always felt under the belief that the scariest things are always the stuff that we bring to the table as readers, and we read into the hints that the author has given us.
Right. Well, here. That's why I have such a problem with when I'm talking to these young filmmakers and writers, all they know is the slasher movies,
Hmm.
Halloween, Friday the 13th. But to me, it started with Psycho, right? And then it just went on and on from there. But it's a chase scene, right? There's no
Hmm.
character development with the creature or anything, backstory at all. And the protagonists are just trying to stay alive and escape from the creature, whatever it is. So, yeah, I can see that in your writing. I mean, I think Lovecraft said it's not, once you've shown the monster, you've ruined the whole thing. It's the imagination of the reader and the scratching at the door and the wind howling and everything that creates the tension, but I think even the Dunwich Horror, when they finally went to open the doors, I remember you never really described what was there. So yeah, that's really good. What about horror? Did you watch the old Universal horror movies or the Hammer horror movies or the American International Poe movies with Vincent Price?
So I do love a lot of the old classic creature features. Some of my favorites are things like, well, speaking of Alien, actually, it's got kind of what I think of as a spiritual predecessor in It, the Terror from Beyond Space. That was
Yeah,
always a huge favorite of mine growing up. The Blob is another really big one for me. Them,
I
The
think
Crawling
they
Eye
listed
was
most of the
fantastic.
script from It, the Terror from Beyond Space. I read that they did, and I looked at it and I said, yeah, pretty much it all takes space in the spaceship and they're coming up and down the ladders and everything. But yeah, well, get back to that anyway. Um, so yeah, well, funny thing about my mom was pretty much that way too. If I could read it, I could read it. And when I
Mhm.
saw the American International Poe films with Price, she took me to the library and I wanted to read Edgar Allan Poe. And this staunch old librarian said, well, that's in the adult section. He's too young for that. My mom said, well, give him an adult library card and give him the damn book.
Well, I mean, to me, that's the way it should be. It's like, I have a pretty large and growing horror collection, and if my kids want to read it, I'm more than happy to let them read it. Of course, I'll admit I prefer to have read it first. I'd love to be able to talk with them about it. If there is something that's challenging, I don't mind having that conversation with them. And I think to some extent, some of the concern about children being exposed to violence or gore or something like that is really more an evasion from a lot of parents who just don't want to have those more challenging conversations with their kids. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're
I
great.
mean,
I think it's a
there's some
great
things you
thing.
got to watch out with the younger ones. Like I remember
Oh,
there's
sure.
a Mexican American girl, and they used to have these big parties. And I went in the bedroom where all the kids were, and they were watching Hellraiser 2. And I'm like, no, she cannot watch that. She's only
Well,
6 years old.
Well, and there's definitely material that conceptually is going to be over their heads too, so they won't really get what they're supposed to get out of it. So yeah, I could, there's definitely limits and lines to be drawn, but that's kind of like why my parents had the view if you could understand it, and that was an important part of it. It's not just are you going to make it through the book, it's can you make sense of the things that it's actually communicating and writing about, the things that give it some substance
Right.
and yeah.
Well, it sounds like we both had great parents that way, very open-minded. Um, let's see. So you mentioned King and Kuntz. Any other modern writers that you like? Did you like Poppy Zebright or Richard Matheson or
Well,
Preston and Child?
I do love Preston and Child actually, especially their earlier work. I did get burned out on them with the constant leaning into the franchises. Like
Right.
I'll admit if I look at a book and I see, like, just for example, a Pendergast novel where there's the name of an ongoing character on the cover, I'm about
Right.
80% less likely to purchase it. But no, I loved The Relic. It's a favorite of mine. Riptide, I think, is an amazing adventure
Oh,
story.
yeah.
Cabinet of Curiosities and Thunderhead are both stories I love. Yeah, Preston and Child were big. I read a lot of science fiction growing up. So, Clark, Asimov, Bradbury, Heinlein, Ursula K. Le Guin is a huge favorite of mine. Neil Gaiman is, I know he's a little contemporary because he's still producing, but yeah, he was he was a big inspiration for me, actually. Coraline, especially, and the Graveyard Book had a pretty heavy influence on my YA title. But I also read a lot of Japanese literature, especially Japanese magical realism authors like Haruki Murakami, Yoko Ogawa, who have sort of this dark surrealism to their work. And like long-term influences, Franz Kafka is one of my biggest in the Latin magical realists. Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Borges are also.
Which one did the Three Bodies? It was Japanese, wasn't it?
Oh no, that's actually Chinese. But yeah, Cixin Liu is Three Body Problem is amazing. In fact, actually, that book directly inspired the novel that I have coming out next year. We actually hadn't talked about this one before, but I have a novel called Extinction Dream that comes out May 2025, and it's my first. It has horror elements, but I call it sort of 80-20, where it's about 80% hard science fiction, 20% horror, and it does emphasize what I hope to be a fairly unique take on the concept of an alien invasion, which was largely inspired by just how bizarre and innovative Cixin Liu's Invasion and Three Body Problem was.
Well, let me put you to the wall here. Who's a better writer, Dean Koontz or Stephen King?
Oh, that's a brutal one. But honestly, I can actually say I do straight out think that King was the better writer. I think Koontz, at his best, sometimes exceeds King. I think some of his masterpieces are definitely incredible books. Intensity, Watchers. I was always a huge fan of Winter Moon, which is this weird little standalone book he did. Right. But yeah, when Koontz wrote at his best, he was an amazing author. But I also felt like he was that some of his books also do fall back into sort of a more formulaic, pay the bills kind of horror writing, where you see the recurring tropes being much more dominant in his piece. Whereas I think King wrote with a little more variety throughout his career. And I do think that if I were to sort of break down all of his work line by line, I feel like his language is a little richer as well. His descriptive language, his presentation of scene.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you want to know technical terms about foliage and architecture, or windows, or any of the background thing, or science, Koontz is the one that he subscribes to Scientific American, Architectural Digest, all this stuff. He gets it absolutely right, and he gets his weapons right. And being an expert,
that's true.
I go nuts when I see some writer that said that he had a rifle and pumped it, and the pellets killed him. I'm like, what are you talking about? Is it a rifle or a shotgun?
Oh no, Koontz loved his Heckler and Koch.
I'll be reading him, and he'll make me laugh so hard I'll drop the book in my lap. He's got a great sense of humor. But I remember hearing a story where, somewhere in his early career, an editor called me and said, are you writing horror comedy? He said, it has a place. It's comic relief. I'm not going to stop doing it.
Oh yeah.
Bad story. Him was he had about 3 or 4 novels on the bestseller list, all under pen names, because some editor told him you got to have a different name if you're writing horror or sci-fi. But he got his first $350,000 in advances put together. He bought all the rights back and put his real name on every one of the books.
Wow.
But, that took a lot of. Well, he had a deal with his wife. He said, I'm going to try this for 5 years. And if I can't make it living at or bring home the bacon, I'll quit. But obviously he did. Yeah. I mean, I've read people say he got published too soon. Like, was it Night Chills, the one with the psychological subliminal brainwashing? And it was pretty erotic. There were rape scenes in there and everything. But
that sounds right. That's been a long time since I've looked at that one, and I'm a little bit murky on some of his earliest books too.
Speaking of Preston and Child too, I mean, I like the transition they made. I think they realized that if they wanted to write bestsellers, the horror market was not going to do it. So even though like Cabinet of Curiosities and The Relic were horror, they kind of labeled it as thrillers now,
Yeah.
and kind of did a cool thing by explaining away the horror, and saying there's some logical reason for it. But yeah, I just, I first read Pendergrass, millionaire driving around with a chauffeur and an old Rolls Royce. I'm like, what? But I kind of let myself get into it because he's like he's a ripoff of Sherlock Holmes. He's a thinking machine,
Oh yeah,
totally.
absolutely.
But everybody does it. So, like I said, the amateurs borrow and the pros steal, right? So that's it.
Well, I
Um,
mean, there's nothing
what
wrong
was
with
the first
some strong.
Universal horror movie you ever saw? You remember? Frankenstein or Dracula or The Mummy?
Well, I mean, I've seen a number of them. I know I've seen Lugosi's Dracula. I've seen Boris Karloff, Frankenstein. I know when I was a kid I saw The Mummy, but actually of all of them, that's the one I really don't remember. Um, I don't know why, but it just didn't
Yeah.
have the strongest impression.
Well,
But
I think it was 2 Halloweens ago they aired Bride of Frankenstein and The Mummy in the theater. So I went and made my wife sit through both of them because, I'd never seen them on a large screen, and it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
well, there's a lot to be
But
said for
as a
seeing
kid, I
some of
was
those old films, on the big screen. I just saw on my birthday, right before my birthday, I saw the Alien re-release in the theater for its 40th anniversary,
oh yeah,
and that was pretty spectacular.
I just love that movie. I don't think that the sequels were as good, but that was just, it blew me away totally because you didn't know what was really going to go on, and then the fact that the science officer was a robot, everything, he just built it and built it and built it and built it till you were totally terrible. Well, Aliens was pretty good.
Oh yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
I do hold up Alien and Aliens as two of the best examples of science fiction horror, but for very different reasons. Alien I think is more the raw primal horror, whereas
Right.
Aliens definitely is a little more bombastic, a little more action oriented. But one of the reasons it actually really worked as a sequel is it deliberately did its own thing. It made itself its own film, building on the platform of the original, and it did so with rich characters and a strong script. And as a result, I think I actually think it's an excellent film. After that, I think they all like. I don't think they're bad films, but I don't think that they hold to the same level of quality, originality, and
The
ingenuity.
only franchise I can think of that went on for 18 consecutive movies is Bond. But some of them were very, very good. And then when Roger
Mhm.
Moore came in, it was okay. Like the one with the voodoo, can't think of the name of it. Live and Let Die. That
Mhm.
was excellent. But he kind of played it straighter.
Mhm.
And I love that black actor that played the voodoo priest. He used to do that old 7 Up commercial and say, the uncool, ha, 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 ha. He was a great actor. I remember one time he was on the Tonight Show and Johnny was interviewing. I think he's like 6'6" or something. And Johnny says, "You take the subway?" And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "Well, how do you walk to the platform?" And he walked. Then he walked like he walked, and he said, "Nobody's ever going to bother me." Yeah, it was really good. Um, I'm trying to. Well, I've done about 5 interviews now, and 3 out of 5 said the first Universal horror movie they ever got to see as a kid was Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Ha, ha.
And
Oh,
that
that's a
was
fun.
mine too, because when I was a kid, the only place you could watch them was like on Sinaguli at midnight. And where I was living, we didn't have a midnight horror show. So I remember sitting there watching it with my cousin and saying, well, at least I get to see all of them in one movie. And then, of course, VHS and Beta came out. You could watch it. Now it just, I don't know, we're so spoiled. I just
Oh yeah.
looked up a movie. Do you remember that Kill Bill that Tarantino did?
Oh
That
yeah,
opening
absolutely.
scene where she's walking, where Daryl Hannah's got the eye, she's walking down the corridor in the hospital, and that whistling tune is playing
Oh yeah.
that
That
Bernard
tune
Herrmann
gets
did.
stuck into my head all
You
the
know what
time.
movie? I know. Do you know what the original movie was that came from?
No, actually.
The Twisted Nerve. it just popped in my head this morning. I looked it up. You can buy it on Amazon for $20. It's about a kind of, well, I think it was done in the early '60s or late '60s, and it was about this young man who's a psychopath, and he's following these women and stuff. He's whistling this tune, and
Hmm.
then Art Herman keeps it. And then he puts the full orchestra behind it, and even ramps up the tempo for the murder scenes and stuff. But you can't beat Bernard Herrmann for doing your soundtrack, can you? I mean, Psycho wouldn't have been Psycho without the ee, 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 ee. That's like, did you watch the Ratchet series is it on Netflix or what? With um, I just saw her on TV last night. What's the actress's name? She was in all the American Horror Stories too.
I know
Um,
who it is, but I actually haven't seen Ratchet. I do enjoy a decent bit of TV, but this last year, I've been so overwhelmingly busy that I actually haven't watched a whole lot of TV shows. Like I'm 3 episodes into the Three Body Problem, and I was really looking forward to seeing that one, and I haven't finished it. So yeah, I'm actually terribly behind on my Netflix shows. Usually, I'll let the kids pick something at that point, and I'll settle with them. Though
well,
we did just get them to watch Alien for the first time, so we're kind of moving in the right direction, I think.
well, I know when you have kids in the house, you're kind of stuck watching. I remember when before my daughter was born, with these neighbors with young kids, we'd always see them at the movies, and they were going to go see a Disney movie or something, and we were going to go see whatever we wanted to see. But yeah, so you haven't seen the House of Usher either.
No, I did see House of Usher. That was one I wasn't gonna miss.
That
No,
wasn't that.
I loved it. I thought I thought all the performances were great with Mark Hamill being a particular standout. I thought it was really cool to see him in
Yeah,
such
I
a
didn't
radical.
realize that was him at first. He lowered that voice. He's really a great actor. Yeah,
Oh
but
yeah, no, such a different character than I've seen him in before. So and he really inhabits that character during the show. And I
the
thought all of
writing,
the
the writing
homages.
just made me hit pause. That scene where he's talking to the DA
Hmm.
and he says, "If life gives you lemons," and the DA says, "Make lemonade," and he goes into that long monologue
Oh
about
yeah.
marketing. I mean, that's the best writing I've seen on TV in years, and it totally sums up our culture and marketing. The brewers are going to make lemon diamonds, and it's not neat, it's not cool, it's not gay, it's lemon. All this stuff. It just blew me away. And that actress that played I guess the ghost of his ex-wife was just fantastic about that. She kind of reminded me of the one in the Stephen King one, Doctor. Oh shit, you know which one I mean.
Dr.
Doctor
Sleep.
Sleep. Yeah, the woman that played the witch, I guess, or had kind of vampire. She
Yeah,
just
yeah.
stole that part right off the screen. She was just gorgeous, sexy, and alluring, but treacherous too. Just amazing. Um, okay, what's the first horror movie, or science fiction movie you ever took on a date?
So that's a tough one. Now I think my best answer would be, I know it's not exactly horror, but it deals with a lot of horrific
Right.
concepts, and it's one that also works to set you on edge, and that's 12 Monkeys. Um,
Really?
Yeah,
With
with
Bruce Willis,
the Terry
right?
Gilliam film with Bruce Willis, Brad Pitt.
Mhm.
It's still a big favorite of mine, actually. I was a big fan of Terry Gilliam. He plays with a lot of concepts of what's real and what's not, the psychology of his characters, and how they sort of get manifested externally in his films. And so, movies like 12 Monkeys and Brazil and The Fisher King, have
Oh,
been
he
life.
did Brazil. I love Brazil,
Oh,
and the
Brazilian,
music.
brilliant.
Background, da, 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 da. Yeah, it was
No,
great.
I mean, just
Well,
watching
mine.
Robert De Niro get eaten by paperwork.
Yeah, that was just. I remember the scene where he made it in the desk in the high rise, and he sat down this big desk. The next thing you know, it slides back into the wall because he's sharing a desk with something else. That was just a
Oh yeah.
fantastic. I don't think it was popular because most people didn't get the comment on society. And I put a quote in my book. Sometimes when we climb the ladder to success, we get to the top and realize it's against the wrong building. I thought that was
Oh, I
just a
like
great
that.
idea.
That's good.
Yeah, well, you're going to laugh at this because I think I went to see The Exorcist with somebody, but I don't remember. But the one I really remember was Alien, because back then you only had like maybe two or three or four movies playing at one theater at a time. And I took three different women to see Alien over the course of like 2 weeks. But I love that
See,
movie so much. I just had to pretend I hadn't seen it before.
well, see, Alien is actually the first movie it's actually the first horror movie I remember seeing. I was maybe 4, I think, the first time I saw it. It scared the crap out of me, to be honest. I had nightmares about that for years. But that was, I think that's part of why I liked Aliens too, was as sort of a pairing together growing up with those films. Alien was definitely the source of my nightmares, and then Aliens was sort of the resolution to those nightmares, because it did sort of allow people to fight back instead of just being mercilessly slaughtered. And I think for me as a kid growing up, first off, seeing the cosmic horror of the implacable, impenetrable universe in Alien, and then seeing that again be resolved and sort of clarified a little bit in Aliens, I think was actually psychologically healthy for me.
Yeah, where she's in that exoskeleton mechanical thing, and what does she say? They'll get away from her.
Get away from her, you bitch.
Yeah, it was great. She's a great actress.
Oh, she's fantastic. I think she was always incredibly talented in everything she did, and it's a shame she never got. I don't think she ever did get an Oscar. I know she got nominated 3 or 4 times, but
Another favorite she did was Copycat.
oh yeah, that was fantastic. Of course, Ghostbusters is brilliant.
Oh yeah, she was alluring and sexy. Whatever happened to Rick Moranis? I don't know. He just kind of disappeared from the scene.
Well, actually, he's kind of a cool story. He retired because he was doing really great. His career was really launching, but he also had children, and he didn't want to be a father who missed his children's lives. And so he had enough money coming in, and so he just retired from acting so that he can focus on making sure his children were a major part of his life.
Yes, but he probably was at a point we'd be lucky to make one movie a year. That would give him 6 months or even 8 months with his kids. But no, I respect that. I think like Angelina Jolie has done that totally.
Mhm.
I mean, and Robert Redford moved to Montana or Wyoming to get out of Hollywood. And
Yep.
most of the real, the pop culture today, I don't get it. When I went to Beverly Hills, Milton Berle and Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, they didn't have to have 20 security guards with them when they went to Rodeo Drive. They just went, And if Michael Jackson had just gone out in public alone more, maybe with one bodyguard, but, this paranoid thing, he might have got mobbed a little bit first, but the more he did it, it would have stopped. Just crazy.
That's definitely
Anyway,
possible.
did you watch the Bates Motel?
I watched some of it. I saw the first season, if I recall correctly. It was a good show. And
I did that too, and then I went back and I watched the other 4 seasons, and it just got better and better. I mean,
I've heard a lot of people say that it really takes off in seasons 2 and 3, and it is one of those things. I just never got back to it once I got interrupted. One thing that tends to happen with me though is, I teach, and so a lot of my schedule revolves around the academic schedule, and so I'll sit down and watch something during the summer, and then if I get interrupted or I don't finish it before summer's done, I get into the academic routine and the teaching rhythm, and I tend to break off from things like that once I get started in the fall.
Well, it's true. You got to grade papers, right?
There's a lot of them.
You have to grade their essays, right? Yeah. You have any students that really struck you as having marvelous talent?
Oh yeah. No, I've had multiple students. One of my, like, I've got one I've got one, Hampton Patty. He moved out west to California, I think. Marvelous prose writer, and excellent poet. He's doing an MFA right now. There's a local author named Jessie Ann York who writes horror actually, and she's done really well and written some amazing stuff. I have one student who stopped, who was an art student actually, who is now the manager of events at Parnassus Books in Nashville, and he's doing a good bit of writing from what I understand. And definitely, I won't say that's every year there's amazing students that come through that I think have a brilliant future as novelists, but instead, I'd say that's every 2 or 3 years I have a student who I read their work and I think this person should be a career writer, that they are going to make it if they pursue this. And then I have other people, it's definitely talented students and stuff. I mean, I've had a lot of wonderful people come through my classrooms.
Years ago. Oh, that reminds me. Probably not, because you majored in creative writing, but did you join a critique group?
So I have done kind of informal stuff over the years. Like right now, my first 2 novels, Mobius Store and Galatalk, came out through Wicked House Press, and I've gotten to know a lot of the authors that have also been published through the press. It's a fabulous community, and so right now, just for example, me and 2 other authors, Blaine Daigle and John Cohn, we just frequently exchange work. Like I'm about to send a novel in progress to Blaine for him to give me some notes, and I just read one of his a couple months ago. And then over the years though, I've come in and out of a lot of different groups. I got hooked up with one for my MFA program that I worked with for about 2 years. We were just exchanging short fiction, but they were a blast to work with, and I'm still in touch with some of them. And then just over time I've swapped with all sorts of different people, especially when I was writing more poetry, which is actually what I studied in grad school.
Really? The poet and didn't know it. Yeah, I joined a group here in DFW. It's really good. It's about 75% traditionally published writers. And they chewed me a new asshole the first 2 times I read. But they have a great system. You break up into 4 or 5 groups. You get 15 minutes to read, and when they critique, you can't say anything. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it gets to be in a big argument. Nobody gets to read. If they ask you a question, you can answer the question. But yeah, the first time I read, one of them said, "When did you write that?" I said, "A month ago." He goes, "Well, I thought maybe it was 1880 or 1930. Who was trying to write like?" And I said, "Poe." And they goes, "Yeah, right. Okay, come on, Richard. It's 2010. Come on." And I don't know, because the first book that really said I could do this was Dean Koontz's Seize the Night. Mm-hmm. Apparently, I didn't absorb what he was doing, because I still think that there's art to fiction, and you get inspiration, and God knows when you put your fingers on the keyboard, sometimes you don't know where the words really come from, right? But what I've taught my students, it's more of a craft. It's mm-hmm. like you wouldn't buy a whole bunch of woodworking stuff and go in the garage and say, "Oh, I'm going to make this beautiful cabinet." No, it's going to take you years to figure out how to learn the craft, and I think it took me at least 5 years to write Lean, because then I went back to Koontz, and like he does have purple prose and he does have beautiful prose in there, but I started to overdo that, So then I went back and I looked at Patterson and stuff, and I said, no, I got to cut down this prose and make the story just go right down the rails, Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's interesting. Tell us a little bit about your books. Start with Galatalk first.
So yeah, Galatalk is the book I'm currently marketing the most heavily, largely because it got voted into something called the Indie Horror Brawl, which is sort of an online competition through a rather large Facebook group called Books of Horror. It's me and 31 other authors whose books got voted in out of a group of about 400. But Galatalk is a science fiction horror novel. It's set like I'll sort of often call it a post-nuclear dystopian novel. It's set about 40 years after nuclear war. Society has, in its own way, recovered substantially. So, it's definitely not like lawless anarchy like you see in a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff. But it's largely centered around an island called Gali Otok, which is an island on the Mediterranean Sea in the Dalmatian island chain off the coast of Croatia. And the main premise of the novel is that a government survey team has been dispatched to investigate strange occurrences at the abandoned Gali Otok prison. The prison itself is a very real place. You can actually still visit its ruins right now. Of the 16,000 prisoners who were interred there under communist Yugoslavia, over 4,000 died from exposure, sickness, malnutrition, thirst, and then being beaten to death by the guards. And my grandfather was a prisoner there for 3 years. He was arrested for smuggling Western goods through the Iron Curtain, and then for spreading capitalist propaganda. And really, it's like I like to think of it as as largely a cosmic horror book where you have a core cast of characters who are thrust into a bleak and hostile environment. Everything that they encounter forms its own kind of threat, so that the reader, at least at first, is meant to be pretty uncertain about what the nature of the real threat of the novel is. But of course, as the piece continues, a large chunk of the conflict comes from not anything supernatural or monstrous, but the characters themselves. I was always really interested in exploring the threshold for brutality that people have, where the people are the greatest villains in many respects throughout the novel and throughout history too. So yeah, that's Galatalk. It's available on audiobook and paperback and of course Kindle Unlimited ebook. And that's my second novel. Mobius Store was my debut. Mobius is I like to think of it as a love letter to small town New England horror, especially the kind written by Stephen King. A lot of homages to Lovecraftian cosmic horror in that as well as a couple small nods to my Croatian heritage too, through the presence of a major Croatian deity as a major villain in the book. But no, that one features two young protagonists, Stuart and Micah. And Stuart stumbles upon a mysterious door in the woods, and when he, like any little boy playing out in the woods, opens it, unleashes a malevolent force onto his town. I will say I grew up in Nashua, New Hampshire. Not exactly a small town; it's a small city, but the town in the Mobius Store is sort of an amalgamation of Nashua, Milford, and Amherst and Hollis. So it's a small cluster of towns right along that southern border that I used to hang out with my friends in. And I'll admit that Stuart and Micah, in many ways, are sort of a amalgamation of my sister and my relationship growing up there. There's definitely a lot of their dynamic that really comes directly from my interactions with my sister. But finally, I have a third novel out called The Neverborn Thief. Neverborn Thief is a YA dark fantasy novel. Sometimes it's called a dark portal book, where a 12-year-old protagonist, Connor, wakes up in the middle of the night to discover that his shadow is being stolen. And he is rather quickly informed that he must venture into the Shadowlands in order to retrieve it. And the Shadowlands is a dark, hostile place that is not friendly to children. It's populated by a lot of dark monsters, the shadows of a lot of people, as well as a kind of a nefarious type of people who have traded parts of themselves to enter into the Shadowlands for their own purposes. And that one is really focused on building its own mythology. I really love books like Watership Down and Stardust, pieces that have their own sort of internal folklore. And that was definitely a major project of this piece. I grew up reading Tolkien as well, and Robert Jordan and G.R.R. Martin. So I really wanted there to be that sort of rich storytelling fantasy aspect in this piece. So yeah, that's the three existing novels I have. December 13th, I have a short story collection called In Those Fading Stars due out, and it's largely a mix of science fiction, horror, and magical realism.
Oh, now, did you do it properly and start writing short stories, or did you just jump right into a novel?
So My history with fiction goes way back. Like I failed to write a few novels when I was a teenager. Terrible stuff, not even remotely presentable. As an undergraduate, a graduate student doing my first master's, I took an equal split in poetry classes and short fiction classes, and so I wrote quite a few short stories back then. Most of them just got shelved and never really ended up anywhere. A couple got dusted off down the road, actually, literally like 20 years later. But no, the my most recent novel, The Neverborn Thief, which came out March 27th this year, was actually the first of my published novels that I wrote. I wrote that somewhere around 2015, 2016, while my wife was pregnant with my youngest son, and I had wanted to write a book that I hoped that one day they'd be able to grow up with. And it took a little longer to get it published than I expected. After Neverborn, though, I actually wrote The Mobius Store. It was the second novel I wrote and the first one that got released, and it didn't. It got a good bit of interest from agents, but I never landed a home for it during those initial years. I wrote it all the way through 2019, and spent about a year submitting it, and then COVID hit, and that kind of derailed me on that. And of course, the world was sort of a weird, anxious, and hostile place, no matter how you responded to COVID
During
itself.
COVID,
But,
yeah, I know.
that was
I met my wife during COVID. It was amazing that we trusted each other enough to meet.
absolutely, absolutely, and
I want to ask you now, do you have a literary agent right now?
no, I've gone the small press route. The Mobius Store got taken by Wicked House Publishing, and at the time, actually, strangely enough, they literally didn't have a released book yet. They had just announced their first title, Mr. Nightmare by Joe Scipione, and because I was because I was really focused on getting Galatalk out there. That was my big push at the time. I'd sent it to them, and it was just like, well, let's see what happens. And I don't know. I really quickly got a really good feel from them as a press, and so I started to get increasingly interested in what they were doing, and that's when I met or got to know M.J. Mars, the author of The Suffering, which was their third novel, and then Blaine Daigle, the author of their fourth novel, The Broken Places. And I found myself really clicking with the people of this press, and Galatalk in the meantime had been signed by another press called Cactus Moon, and they were a more distant, hands-off press, and I found myself like comparing my experiences with these two publishing houses. And I had also published a collection of poetry at the same time, which also had a really remote and disengaged press. And so I was comparing these two presses, and one thing I realized was through Wicked House, I had met multiple authors who I developed strong professional relationships with. I was in regular communication with the owner of the press, and as well as some of their selecting editors. And I had a great process with them. I love their cover artist. He's done all of my books, even books I published through other presses. I think their editorial staff is fantastic, and I really started to feel like this was just there was a really special thing happening through this press. And since then they've put out a whole catalog of impressive books. A lot of them have been bestsellers on Amazon in some of the larger categories, not the niche categories. Amazing quality of work that I've been seeing, and again, I've built at this point lasting friendships with many authors through there. So
Let me ask
I'm
you
not
a question for
sure.
people. This should be watched by people who want to write or are writers, right? What would you advise somebody who has their first or their second novel? They know it's pretty good. They've tried the traditional route, getting an agent, which is really harder than hell these days.
Mhm.
But self-publishing versus going with a small publisher. What do you think are
So
the advantages?
personally, I like working with small presses, partially because, and maybe this is just, the background I come out of, but I don't think authors should have to pay for their own work. I do think it's important that we have strong businesses that are willing to support and invest in creative works. And, personally, I'm like I said, I'm married. I have 2 kids of my own, 2 stepchildren. We have an expensive household. We don't live fancy at all, but
Right.
I can't say I have a whole lot of extra capital to blow on pursuits. In fact, one of the things that made writing appealing to me for all these years is that it's free. If you have paper, if you have a basic computer, whatever. I mean, basic equipment gets you writing, and you don't, you like. I like to paint too, but paint you have to buy expensive paints if you want to make lasting works. You invest in canvas. There's this whole
Yeah.
upfront, this a whole ongoing expense to it. And with Wicked House, for example, they paid for my cover, which I love my covers. You've got, you've seen Mobius and Galatok. I'm also thrilled with the
Right.
Nevermore Thief and In Those Fading Stars. I think they look amazing. I've had multiple rounds of editors for my books. I've had proofreader as well. They pay for the formatter. They pay for, they do a lot of advertising. They do a lot of work corresponding with presses or with distributors and that kind of stuff. I mean, they're a real force that helps drive and move my books. At this point, while I'm not, an enormous, I'm not ready to retire from teaching and lean on the writing yet, but I feel
Right.
like I've
Now, do
done.
they use if you want to get on the bookshelves, which I had this one guy try to pitch me, was going to get me in every Barnes and Noble in the country. I said, well, there's only about 500 stores left, so that means I sell 500 books. What the hell are you talking about? And now Barnes and Noble, everything is spine out unless you're with a big publisher. I said, so the chances of somebody coming in there and stumbling over my book at Barnes and Noble is like 1 million to 1. But now, does Wicked House Press use Ingram Spark or whatever? Because I think you have to follow certain rules to get into Barnes and Noble.
Yep. Yeah, so if you want to
So
use
kind of
Ingram Spark, you have
bookstores.
to set it at a 40% bookstore discount, and have your book returnable to the publisher for full refund in order for Barnes and Noble to stock. Well, most Barnes and Nobles to stock it. There are some
Right.
qualifiers to that. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
maybe
no,
your local one might do it for you.
yeah,
Did
exactly.
you ever do any book? Have you tried to do book signings?
Yeah, I've done a number. So I've done a couple of personal events, and I've done some combined events. So, overall, my audience is actually pretty scattered across the nation. I've sold a good number of copies, so I know I've got a good number of readers, but they're not concentrated in any one place. And so, so far, most of my personal events have been virtual events where I host an online reading, and I've had anywhere between 15 people show up for some, 75 to 80 people for others. So
Yeah.
so I've done it that
Well, I
way.
kind of got away from it because when I was in this writing group with a lot of these traditionally published authors, and they told me they were so excited because they got into Walmart, but they didn't know how it worked. Because if you go into Walmart, the publisher has to supply like about 100 or 120 copies of your books. Well, if you're doing a book signing at Walmart, you're going to be lucky to sell 10, 15, 20. And then he went out to the back of the Walmart to have a cigarette, and guess what he saw? They took a whole shopping cart of those 100 books, ripped the covers off, and threw the books in the dumpster. So
That
their
that
advice to
sounds
me
right.
is you're putting yourself out of print if you do that. I
Yeah.
mean, unless you're Dean Koontz or, a really well-known author, book signings just aren't going to move books. It's a good marketing tool to have people get to know you. But I found that people kind of like they walk by you, they kind of like they're afraid to talk to you for some reason. I don't know what it is, but because I've done some with maybe even 4 authors, near Halloween and everything, and I would say only like maybe 2% of the people in the story even came up to us. They're afraid you're going to make you buy a book or what. I don't know, but that was a horror story he told about them ripping. Well, that's how publishing works. So they rip the covers off, send them back to the publisher.
Yeah.
They'll mail the book back. But he figured he put at least 120 of his own books out of print. I like what you said about amalgamation because I did a coming of age book called Elvis and Me, and it was set in the 60s in Wisconsin where I grew up. And there's this little group of young boys, right? And there's a serial killer on the loose called the Sin Eater, right?
Hmm.
But it's kind of a well, it my cousin said, you know, that movie Stand By Me and the story, why don't you write a book about us like that? So I did, and I really liked it. But everybody I knew went, am I in the book? Which one am I in the book? I just say, no, they're an amalgamation of you and Tommy, Mike and Steve and Debbie and all this stuff, you know. They just don't get it unless they write, you know, they just want to know. And then you find people get paranoid too. If you put me in your book, what did you say? You know, people, or you meet writers, they'll write a whole book and they'll put it in a drawer because they're afraid to put their name on it and have it go out there and have people associate what they wrote with their name. But you've got to be brave to be a writer. You know, I mean, I see that all the time on the internet. Well, I think I want to use a pen name because, you know, I don't want people to think that that's what's in my head.
I think to some
It's just a
extent
bad
too, it just
relation.
depends on why you write. I've had this conversation with my classes before where I tell them, there's absolutely nothing wrong with writing that you do just for yourself that you do plan to put in a drawer. If that's what you want, if that's why you're doing it, it's just, express or release or something like that. Sure. I mean, by all means, it's
Mhm.
a very healthy practice. It's productive. It's a good way to feel better about yourself. And that's wonderful. I think it's great. But if your goal is to actually, if you're writing something with this idea that somebody's going to read it, at that point, you've got to lean into that. That the whole point is that you want people to read it. You should be fighting to get your work out to people. That anything you can do to help get your word out is what you should be doing. Like, one thing that comes with working with a small press is that, on the one hand, Wicked House has been fabulous about promoting the book. I think, they've done a lot, good bit of advertisements. They've hooked me up with a number of different little opportunities that have been great. Same with the other presses that I've worked with, but at the same time, I do a lot myself. I'm always going to be. I will always be my biggest advocate. Nobody will ever want to advocate for me as much as I want to advocate for my own work. And if I don't want to advocate
Yeah,
for
of
my
course.
own work, people will feel that. They'll feel like I'm not excited about it. That I'm not thrilled that they're there reading my work. And I mean, ultimately, I love the fact that right now I know there's probably right now there could be 100, 200 people reading one of my books right now, and it's fully believable and plausible. And that to me is it's the most amazing thought. And I will do anything I can to keep perpetuating that, within reason, of course, but still.
Yeah, yeah, I had a weird thing with the I have a copy of it up here. Let me see. This one. This one I wrote, and I wrote it kind of on the tails of Dan Brown. Remember, it took him 5 years to write a sequel to the Da Vinci Code. Everybody was doing it. And I put out a self-published version, and I got a film option on it from Bill Todman Jr., whose dad
Nice.
was, Goodman Todman. He was set at CBS. They never made it, but it got me an agent. But I got the wrong agent. I got in about 20 countries, but all he did was I put it on Publishers Marketplace, and as we sold one, another country would see it. They jump on board. All he did actually, that I could tell, got out there and because he went to like it's a big book fair in Germany. I forget which city it's in, but he went there and he went to the London one. But what I got, he missed two meetings. The people wanted to buy my book. So I just really, and he didn't have any staff. It was just him. But he did work for Dutton, and he was head of their marketing and editing division. So he was really in the business. But I really picked the wrong agent. It was funny. But it was funny when I did the film thing. He didn't do film, so he recommended me to this lady in L.A. who, oh God, can't remember the big names in writing that she agented. But I'm talking like real literature writers.
Hmm.
But she had this thick Hungarian accent. And I said, "Oh, you're Hungarian, so are you like the Gabor sisters?" You know what she said? She goes, "No, I'm a vertical Hungarian, not a horizontal Hungarian." So I got to put that in a book somewhere because that's yeah. And I think as writers, we just we make up stuff, but like you said, we amalgamate people we know, places we've been, experience, and I mean, there's this old adage: you really shouldn't start trying to get published till you're 40, so you have a lot of life experience, and I think that's kind of true. Although King started when he was, I love that story where he was selling mimeograph stories in high school, but the principal
Mhm.
didn't suspend him. He sent him to the local newspaper where he learned how to edit. You know, I mean, think if he hadn't done that, maybe he would never become Stephen King.
Yeah, that's
Um,
very possible.
but his books are just. I haven't read one. I think the last one I read was Hearts in Atlantis.
Mhm.
And Waldman, the screen, he just used the first 40 pages of the book because the rest of it was pure crap. It was about him sitting around playing cards in college. Who cares? But the first 40 pages were beautiful. You've seen the movie, right, with Anthony Hopkins and the little boy?
Yeah, a long time ago when it first came, because that was a made-for-TV movie, if I remember right, and I'm pretty sure I saw it when it aired.
No, it was in the theater. It was in the theater because of
Oh,
Anthony
okay.
Hopkins in it. But I think his shtick, pardon my Yiddish, is kids. He really likes to make kids the protagonists, because they're
Mhm.
innocent and he writes kids really well. I think his forte is writing about, the chief of police, the mailman, the butcher, the milkman, the neighbors next door. He just really gets into that. And like, I remember him Green saying, like, if you're going to kill off the janitor, you got to give us just a little bit of background so we give a damn if he got killed or not. And that's why I don't like slasher movies. They just kill people right and left with
Yeah.
no reason or whatever. So, although, I mean, you think about like the series Walking Dead, what was so good about it was they would have some episodes where just Daryl and what's her name, the old lady, just sitting on a porch talking for a whole hour.
Yeah.
But then you really gave it to them about these people. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's interesting. I'm just giving myself a little plug here. So that this is one is about kind of like Dan Brown. There's this group that's attacking the Vatican. At first, they think it's the Templar organization of the Knights Malta, but then as the story unfolds, you find out no, it's something more nefarious, and it's called the Eschatology Institute. And I kind of was thinking about, oh, what's his name, L. Ron Hubbard, when I wrote it,
Mm.
but I didn't want to use his name because they sue everybody over everything. Period.
Yeah. I don't wanna touch anything involved with Scientology in any shape, way, or form.
Yeah. Well, I did, but they can't prove that I was talking. And then this one I based on, it's a thriller, noir thriller. And then in the last quarter, it goes into pure, like one of my favorite Hammer horror movies was The Devil Rides Out with Christopher Lee and Charles Gray playing the Aleister Crowley character. So the first part of the book is like we call a sunset noir, where it's kind of like a 40s noir thing, but in
Mhm.
modern LA. And I really based it on Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell
Hmm.
because I don't normally outline a lot, but with this, I had copious notes and they had everything that I had those two characters do in the book is absolutely true. It's things they actually said to people, things they actually did.
Hmm.
And it just, I hope it catches on more because I don't think people know the whole story, just how mixed up and perverted even Ghislaine was, even growing up in the thing, like there's one scene that's an actual quote where, well, they go to this fashion show and she's hooking him up with this billionaire lingerie corporation. I won't mention names, but you can kind of put two and two together. And Chance, my main protagonist, says, well, how do you keep so young and beautiful and thin? And she goes, well, honey, have you ever seen a concentration camp prisoner that was fat? I'm on the Nazi diet. And that's an actual quote from this woman. And she's 100% Jewish. So, what a twisted psychosis that woman had was just terrible, terrible, terrible. So I put up, they're available on Amazon.com. That's probably the best place for them. Just look for them all, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's definitely the easiest. I mean, they're available. They're on Ingram Spark, so you can order them through anywhere if you want to avoid Amazon. But it's definitely the easiest.
Oh, Amazon's great. I mean, I can order something at 4 o'clock on Sunday and have it delivered by two on Saturday and have it delivered by 2 o'clock on Sunday. I don't know how the hell they do that,
Oh, there
but
is
they
a lot
do
to
it.
be said for that. So,
Oh yeah, for sure. All right, I think we pretty much covered it. Oh, one last thing. You did how many audiobooks have you done?
so right now only the Mobius Door and Galatalk are available on audio. Mobius
How
was
how how are those working out for you, marketing wise?
So I don't know the sales numbers for them actually because I haven't gotten direct numbers from Tantor Audio because my advance hasn't been covered yet. I know after that I'll start getting my royalty numbers, and so I'll get a good sense. But I know Brian Telestai did a great job narrating the Mobius store. I was really happy with it, and I've gotten some really great responses for it. And I know Joe Hempel narrated Gala Talk, and I absolutely loved the job that he did. And I've gotten amazing responses. I know literally a good number of people are actually listening to it right now. So I think that one's been going pretty well. But again, I mean, I actually haven't
Where
gotten the
did you
most
find
recent.
your narrators? Did you find your narrators through Fever or ACX?
No, so both of my audiobooks are put out by Tantor Audio. They're an audiobook company, and they're in charge of auditioning the narrators. With Gala Talk, Joe Hempel, I believe, either specifically requested it or they responded to our suggestion of Joe. But so that one was a little bit different because we already kind of knew who Joe was and he was familiar with the book. But no,
Oh,
Tantor basically has sent us an audition track and said, "Hey, is this a narrator that you think would work for what you're looking for?" And then we can say either yay or
no.
nay.
Do you have to pay Cantor anything?
No, no, actually, they do give an advance on the books that they sign,
Oh,
and so yeah, it's costed me nothing. Again, that's part of why. Again, I like to advocate the small press route. Is that
right.
self-published? And don't get me wrong. There's some incredible audiobook narrators who charge completely reasonable rates. I would actually recommend any self-pub folk who are looking for an audiobook to try out Tom Jordan, who does the narration for Andrew Van Way. He's fabulously talented and very, very good rates. He works on a royalty rate, so you don't even pay him up front. But no, I mean, really, a big reason for the small press route is that it does it gets your foot in the door in a lot of places that are harder to access. They do pay for a lot of things that would normally be an out-of-pocket expense, and for the most part, I can't
Now,
really afford.
are they available on Brain Fart? What's Amazon's big
Audible.
audio?
Yeah, yeah,
Audible,
yeah. Both
Apple.
Mobius and Galatalk are on Audible, and a number of other sites as well.
Huh. Well, I hired this guy myself, and we did a royalty deal, right? So he didn't charge me a lot. It's taking him a long time because I think this is only the third one he's done, but he's
Mhm.
excellent. Because in this book, I added it up. I've got six female characters. The sixth one's a child. One's Russian. One's British. One's Hungarian. Or American. Then the males, I've got a British character and a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. But he really nailed it. He really did a pretty good job with the female voices too. I originally kind of wanted a male and a female actor, but that's really expensive
Yeah,
to do two actors. But
absolutely.
and I've
And
heard enough audiobooks where they just kind of soften their voice and they have acting ability that it really works out well.
oh yeah.
Well, I think that we've just about covered everything, and it was great talking to you. Um,
Yeah, it's been great being on. Thank you so much.
yeah, I'm gonna try to get. Sorry, I overdid it the other week. I did 4 podcasts in one week. I was exhausted, and I was trying to fight to get them uploaded on YouTube. because it takes forever for these to upload.
Oh yeah.
But otherwise, it's pretty good. But this is kind of fun for me. And then June 5th, I'm going to be on AM Bite. I don't know if you ever heard of that. He's kind of a Gnostic, metaphysical, esoteric podcast, but I'm doing one on the Necronomicon.
Oh, very
And
cool.
yeah, I knew the history of Peter Levinda, but I hadn't looked into it for a long time. But, did you ever read his sequel, Dead Names, by Simon to the Necronomicon?
No, I'm afraid not.
You should take a glance at it because I've never saw an autobiography that was written as if it wasn't written by the person who's the main point of the autobiography. But he writes his whole autobiography as if he's a third person telling the story, and this is just
That's
a
a fun
friend
idea.
of his. So he's very astute and very creative. I got to give him that. And the book started as kind of a joke. Actually, they put it together, and they had this magic shop called the Magical Child. It started as the Warlock in Brooklyn. Then it went. They decided they were doing so well, they went to Chelsea and Manhattan, right? But they had in that period there was such a conflagration of occult and everything. And Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist just came out. OTO was just kind of starting to spread, and he had Wiccans and magicians and any kind of countercultural group you could imagine hung out at the bookstore and a restaurant and a bar like a block away. So he kind of just fell into this whole thing. But they put the book together as a test for those that were studying magic and the occult, because there's a if you know about ceremonial magic, right? You want to call an angel or demon, right? You got to be in the circle to protect you, right? Then you put the mirror or whatever in a triangle. That's where you bind the angel or the demon, right? And then you politely ask for what you want or communicate. But what's the third thing you got to do? Banish them, right? Say, thank you very much. You're gone. Boom. But in the Necronomicon book that he wrote, he didn't put anything to bind them or banish them. So this guy, Justin Sledge, who's an actual academic on esoterics and the Bible and everything, said, it's like inviting a tiger into your house and just see what happens, whether you believe these things are real or not. But it was a test for the students to say, no, this is crazy. I kind of bind them and banish them. But now what scares me is you got these teenagers out there playing with the damn thing. That's where I think he's kind of like a little bit more morally reprehensible, because the damn book's still selling and selling. You can find it on any bookshelf anywhere. But anyway, little side story. But I don't know what in my writing, even if it's not really horror, magic and the esoteric and things just kind of like creep in somehow, but probably because I like horror, and I want to make it, I'm with you. I like, what would you call it? Gothic horror is kind of what I like. I mean, I like subtle horror, like Rosemary's
Mhm.
Baby, for example. I can't, I've enjoyed Halloween and Friday the 13th, but not really. You've seen one, you've seen them all. But like the House of Usher with a subtle hint of cosmic terror or something. You don't need to see the person being cut to ribbons or whatever.
Yeah.
So, what would you call that? I mean, Gothic is going back too far. I don't know what a good word for it would
Well,
be.
I mean, you could call it something like modern Gothic. I think
Yeah,
like the way I always put it is I like horror that's focused on dread, where it's really focused on building anticipation and dread for what could be there, could be ahead, where it builds an atmosphere of discomfort. So personally, like I'd probably call it something like dread horror, but modern Gothic would also make a lot of sense, because it's sort of looking at that same aesthetic sense that the older Gothic was bringing to the table.
yeah, I think so. I didn't think about that because I came up with Sunset Noir. I read that somewhere. It means present day noir, and modern Gothic pretty much fits. That's why my favorite Hammer is The Devil Rides Out, because it's well, first of all, Christopher Lee plays the good guy. You know, I mean, he's kind of like Olivier, kind of over the top Shakespearean actor, but he really does come across as powerful and steals every scene he's in. You know, but the funny thing about him, did you know he's like about 6'5",
Actually, no, I didn't know that.
and he originally wanted to be a leading man. They couldn't use him because he towered over all the other male actors. Period. It's like with I knew this one woman. She was crazy about Chuck Norris and that Walker Texas Ranger show.
Mhm.
They shot at her Dallas, Bailey, and she ran to a friend's house because they were shooting in her palatial house in the backyard by the pool. And she ran through the gate, and there's Chuck Norris standing on two boxes, so he'll be the same height as the black guy in the Stetson. And she just went, "Oh well, moving on." Anyway, well, Andrew, thank you very much.
No, thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll let you know when I get it posted.
Absolutely perfect.